welcome to Expat Living. We are in front of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Ho Chi Minh City, known in Vietnamese as Nhà thờ lớn, or literally translated as the Big Church. This is the largest and the most important church in Ho Chi Minh City. The first brick was laid here to start the construction in 1877, and at that time, this building represents the finest work of the French colony. And what else do you know about this historical place? Rather than just an iconic place where people like to come and take photo shoot, well, we have it all here in this book. Let's now explore Ho Chi Minh City with its author, Tim Doling.
My name is Tim Doling. I come from Bristol in the UK, which is an old port city. When I was a student, I studied history. Well, I first came to Vietnam back in 1989 when I was living in Hong Kong, and I actually came here as a tourist. So it was quite an interesting time to be here.
Holding a master degree in medieval Welsh history, Tim Doling spent most of his career managing art centers and theaters in the United Kingdom and Hong Kong. From 1995 to 2004, he worked in Vietnam with intervals for UNESCO and the Ministries of Culture, Sports and Tourism.
I came back to Vietnam with my wife in 2010, and when I came back, of course, my original interest in history was revived. When people come to Saigon as a visitor, they have a pretty poor deal because they don't see very much. But there's actually so much more to see. Not just an economic centre, it's also a place with a lot of history. So I've been able to balance up that view of Saigon to give more of an overall picture of what was regarded as the Pearl of the Orient in the colonial period.
Tim Doling's knowledge and experience on the city's heritage has incorporated in his guidebook Exploring Ho Chi Minh City, published in 2014. It draws back the curtain on the 300-year history of the city. Flipping through the more than 400 pages of Tim Doling's book, you will discover new places to explore and familiar locations revealed in great detail. The lesser-known information is really interesting to both first-time visitors and even locals.
So I've been to this place so many times, but all I know is this is the post office of Ho Chi Minh City. So what else should I know?
Well, it's one of the best-known buildings in Ho Chi Minh City, but most people are told wrongly that it's a work by Eiffel. It's actually the last and greatest work by a very famous civic architect called Alfred Fulu. It was finished in 1891 and he died the following year.
Oh, just 1 year after.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. What makes it so special is this is almost like a work of industrial architecture. It looks like maybe a factory or a railway station, but in fact it's a post office. What he was trying to do was to show people human technological progress. And then along the front of the building you can see all the signs with the names of great thinkers, inventors, scientists. Yeah, we can. This is open to the public. So in the middle of the hall you can see there's a square of tiles, and on this spot, that's right, and on this spot at one time, before 1954, was this, which was a statue, probably a fountain, water fountain.
Oh, it's exactly this place?
Yeah, exactly. And it stood on this site. This is the Greek messenger goddess Iris, which is all about communication, I guess, so it's appropriate. But we don't know what happened to it because it disappeared after 1954, possibly in somebody's back garden somewhere.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah. And how about the map?
Yeah, this one's quite recent, more recent. This is 1936, but this one's very special. This dates from 1892, and it's the only map in existence which shows the existence of something called the Belt Canal. I don't know if you can see
Is that the boldest one?
Well, you can see all the rivers and creeks. And the French, when they first arrived in 1862, they wanted to turn the whole city into an island. so that their gunboats could patrol around it, almost like an island. The ironic thing is, by the time it was actually completed, there was no longer a threat by land from the north. So it wasn't really required, it was a waste of money.
Yeah. And even the Notre Dame Cathedral, it was used to be called the expensive folly, right? 2.5 million francs at that time.
Yeah, something like that. I think people over the years came to love it, however.
Yeah, I love it.
There's an interesting story about the cathedral, because when they were...
Should we go there
Yeah,
first?
we should go outside and have a look.
Yeah.
Yep. So there's an interesting story about this cathedral. When it was being constructed from 1877 to 1880, there was a crisis in the city because there wasn't enough water to go round for the population. But suddenly, while they were laying the foundations for this cathedral, they chanced upon a big underground river. It was seen as an act of God because, of course, they were building the cathedral, and suddenly God provided all this water. But then suddenly somebody was standing over there at the top of the Rue Catinat in the early 1890s, and they noticed the cathedral was starting to lean on the one side. And they did some investigations, and they found that it was sinking into this underground river. So they did some remedial work to prop it up, and after that it was still slanting. So in 1895 they installed the two spires. So in the original pictures from immediately after construction in 1880, there are no spires.
Do you have the picture?
I do. This is the picture here.
Oh yeah, it's different from here.
And in fact, the spire on that side, the west side, is actually about half a meter higher than the one on this side. Yeah.
Oh, this one. Oh,
so nobody knows. Colonial.
Half a meter is quite like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like that from here. But we do have some documents which suggest that the one spire is significantly higher than the other, which suggests that perhaps there's something in it after all. And
I have a feeling that it's lower on this side since you
have
told
to go
me.
back there to find out.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is go back to the top of the Rue Catinat, the Doncoy Street. Well, we're now outside the Unification Palace, which was built between 1962 and 1966. So this building stands on the site of the first palace, which was constructed in 1868 to 1873. That's the one. It's a very beautiful palace, almost like the Palace of Versailles. It was later called the Norodom Palace.
Norodom Palace.
It cost 12.5 million francs to build. So that makes it one of the most expensive buildings in Asia in the 19th century.
Wow.
Fit for a king. It was completely redundant, and in fact for the rest of the colonial period. So it wasn't until 1955 that the first president of South Vietnam, Ngo Dinh Diem, actually made it his presidential residence. It was bombed in 1962 and then completely demolished and replaced by the current building. So it was a huge waste of money.
Architectural aspect is such a huge waste. Yeah.
A very big waste. But that's not to say that this building is not very special. It was designed by a very famous modernist architect called Ngo Viet Thu, who had awards for many of his works overseas, but this is his best known work. If you look at the front of the building, you'll see immediately that it's built in the shape of bamboo to give it that distinctive. But it's all about fusing modernist architecture with Oriental architecture.
When designing the new palace, architect Ngo Viet Thu achieved these by building representations of auspicious Chinese characters into the design. 6 Chinese characters of Qi, Kou, Zhong, San, Zhu, Xing represents good luck, freedom of speech, the state's responsibility, humanity, sovereignty, and prosperity. Tim Doling then took me to District 5 to trace back to the 1680s when there was a tiny settlement of Chinese refugees. Those who were recruited by a Nguyen Lord to develop the economy of the South took root until today. They got into marriage with the locals.
So we're now on the west side of the city, but before the Fujianese people came here, on the other side, the original founders settled in what they called the Sa'mingheng, and this was on the east side of the city.
You have here in the picture.
Yeah, this is the main. It's sometimes called a Din because the Mingheng were half Vietnamese and half Chinese because they intermarried with the local community. So it's half a Hoi Guan and half a Din, half Chinese, half Vietnamese. And it's very important because this is on the site of the original temple, the very first temple to be established in what we know today as Cholan.
And this place also served for worshipping?
Yeah, this is a very popular temple. And it's right in the center of the town, so everybody comes here to worship on special festival days.
Interesting.
Tim Doling has authored numerous books over the years.
Books, I produced probably about 10 or 11 different books while I was with Visiting Arts, which were kind of cultural mapping projects on different countries ranging from Slovakia, Slovenia, Norway, Japan to Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos.
Together with the Exploring Ho Chi Minh City guidebook, Tim Doling authored The Railways and Tramways of Vietnam and guidebooks on the northwest and northeast of Vietnam. Tim is currently working on the book called Exploring Hue, Hội An and Da Nang, and the second book on the railways and tramways of Vietnam, set to be published in 2017. Tim also runs a heritage portal called Historic Vietnam and 2 Facebook public groups called Saigon Cholan Then and Now and Hue Then and Now. This is where hundreds of rare photos and facts on the past and present time have been collected and posted. Tim Doling has posts on daily basis. Tim Doling runs heritage tours in Ho Chi Minh City, which introduce a wealth of lesser-known places of interest alongside the city's better-known historic sites. Let's now join in one of Tim Doling's 4-hour heritage excursions around downtown Ho Chi Minh City. The tour today starts at Caravel Saigon Hotel, right in the center of District 1, where guests are offered a welcome breakfast and supplied with a souvenir folder of historic maps and old photographs. Tim Doling wants to make it easier to imagine how the city once looked. Starting in the city center at Caravel Hotel,
Would you like to come over here and I'll say something about this street?
they then checked out the Municipal Theatre, also known as Saigon Opera House, a piece of French colonial architecture in Vietnam built in 1897. The building was restored in 1995.
Go to the other side.
The government did decide to restore these?
The government did, yeah, but it was funded by the French at that time. I'll say something.
Also at the Lam Son
So it's
Square
quite
is the
important
Continental
political and
Hotel
military
built
forces as well as
between
being
1903 to 1905.
So they built this huge cafe terrace, and throughout history it became very, very popular, so it was always the place to go. And after the construction of the theatre, this really became the center of the town, and right next to it was this very upmarket continental terrace. So that's why it became such a kind of an icon of the city.
It's partly for my work because I work in heritage in New Zealand. So that's really important to understand that these markers, they're living buildings. They represent the culture of people, of ancestors that have come through and they've survived colonisation. And that's really, really important.
This was the American legation.
Tim Doling went on to show the groove around several of the city's other hallmarks. He also showed them the black and white photos to add weight to the stories he told.
Called the Refinery.
As the tour continues, they head down to the riverfront and around the banking district near the iconic Utexco Tower.
They were building things. This is the Grand Canal, the last bit of it just before it was filled in the 1880s. And this is where we are now. This area here, as I say, it became a boulevard in the late 1860s. In 1885, the first railway line was built in the whole of Indochina from Saigon to Mito. And the first railway station was right here. And it ran all the way down the boulevard.
This tour is highly recommended for those that want to get deeper into the history and architecture of the city.
They're actually very interested in restoring old buildings. These are the places.
I've been living here for almost a year as an expat, and I work locally on Hangi. And I see a lot of these buildings every day, but I didn't really know anything about their history, so I thought it would be good to find out more.
It's interesting how he is merging the architecture with the economy, with life, and how that develops, and the French influence, the Chinese influence, all of that kind of piece. I like the architectural piece of it.
Again, I mean, all of these buildings should be heritage buildings, but they're not. Any old heritage relating to the French period is just not regarded as heritage, which is very sad and obviously has to be rectified soon, otherwise there'll be nothing left.
These guides have been great helpers for Tim Doling in the creation of his books and tours. American architect Mel Shank first arrived in the city in 1971 to work on a construction project.
One of the activities that I best enjoyed was taking the walking tours with him while he was writing this book. He piqued my interest also in the historical architecture, particularly the French colonial architecture, as well as the indigenous buildings that were first built here, and like the oldest house in the city, right?
Tim Doling also has an interest in the railways and tramways of Vietnam, which resulted in the first in-depth English language history book of Vietnam's rail and tram networks, from their inception to the present day.
We share an interest in railways. Sometimes we exchange information about Dalat. I've spent a lot more time on that railway and done a lot more research into it. No, I'm always amazed at the amount of detail which he goes into.
More than just a book, Tim Doling turned the subject of Vietnam's railways into a fascinating topic for any railway enthusiast, researcher, historian, and even average visitor by conducting Vietnam's railway tour. The 16-day tour by train is offered in conjunction with the Hanoi-based Asia Plus Tours, with which Doling has closely worked with over the years.
Tour này thì đi theo cái đường sắt Bắc Nam, khách hàng hoàn toàn có thể thỏa mãn được cả hai. Một là gì? Cái niềm đam mê của họ là tìm hiểu khám phá về tàu và đường sắt Việt Nam, và cũng có thể tham quan được hầu hết những cái tuyến điểm chính đẹp nhất của đất nước mình.
This is the north-south
Tim
line.
Doling and Vũ Trung Hậu have been
Really
friends
so.
since 1996.
Time
They
the
share
railway
the
was
same
bombed
interest
so much,
in
and they're very
heritage,
similar to what
history,
both
and
have another
tourism
picture.
development, which has led to
The
current
top end,
successful
that one
work
there is
together.
real.
Tất cả những công việc mà anh Tim làm thì mình đều thấy là anh ấy làm bằng cả một cái niềm đam mê và cái nhiệt huyết, bằng cái trái tim của mình. Những cuốn sách mà anh viết về Việt Nam nó rất là hay, rất là sâu sắc. Tư liệu anh ấy tìm thì nó rất là phong phú.
Tim Doling's particular area of interest is carrying out detailed research on hitherto undocumented historic buildings, with a view to harnessing the heritage value of the urban landscape for tourism.
I'm actually working with a group of people at the moment, and we have a friend who's developed a software app, which means that people can actually upload pictures of a historic building onto a modified Google map, and then we can add historic data, the name of the architect, the date of construction, and anything about the building that we know. So this is kind of the first step. It's like people sourcing.
Ho Chi Minh City is not just a dynamic economic powerhouse of Vietnam. Tim Doling always said, if you look hard enough, you can still find what's left of the elegant architecture heritage, which won the city title, the Pearl of Orient. And let's now move on to our next segment of Time Out.
One of the coolest things about Ho Chi Minh City is the old apartment buildings, and I want to discover this. And to help me today, I have a local Saigoneer as well, Hattie. So, what's cool about this building that we are here?
Okay, this old style building is the hotspot for Vietnamese young adults and teenagers. They come here for shopping, and there's a lot of different shop and store here, and they're all Vietnamese. Vietnamese designer made in Vietnam.
Okay, so please show me around.
Yeah, let's check it out. So as I tell you before, this building has a lot of different shops with different styles, and the shop is one of my favorite in this building. They have a retro vintage style, and just like the decoration make me feel like home. It's like when I was a kid hanging out at my grandma's house.
The characteristic making old apartment buildings stand out is the old French architecture. This brings a nostalgic feeling from the old days.
Thì khi mà bước vào cái không gian này, bạn thấy đây chính là nhà của mình. Những cái cửa sổ rất là lớn, những cái khung sắt, những cái cầu thang kiểu như vậy.
The products at boutiques here are locally handmade by local tailors and fashion designers. These pieces usually feature trendy pastel colours and are made of local materials too. So, how about the quality that's made by the Vietnamese guys?
Really good. I can say the way they make it, the fabric is like high quality, but with a reasonable price.
The prices range from $15 to $40 for a piece from here.
With love for Eve was tortured. She only had an apple tree, but you've got an orchard.
Before we've been to a few urban stores, this place is completely different. It's a vintage store for both guys and girls. And everything here is vintage and unique. You cannot find a second piece or second things like this in Vietnam.
Yep, sexy and you know it.
Yeah, and then you're gonna fall.
Like these ones.
Try it
Grandma
out.
style. Have a shot.
How do I look?
Yep. Sexy and you know it. The grungy and vintage looks of old apartments also make this place an ideal background for street fashion shoots.
Tưởng là vintage store thì làm bán đồ second hand, cho nên là cái chỗ này cổ cổ nên nó cũng hợp với cái concept của tụi em nữa. Nên trang trí mọi thứ nó cũng sẽ rất là dễ dàng hơn, không có cần phải làm gì nhiều quá. Nên là bản thân cái nhà này nó đã cũng có cái nét riêng của nó rồi.
Okay, so it's been a long day of shopping and all that stuff, and now I want to sit down and relax. What should we do?
You're a tea lover?
Is that why we're here?
Yep. So this is this party, a tea shop that has you can see that's an old traditional English style with English tea.
Cool.
The special thing here is that you can smell the tea first before you order.
Also, you get to pick your own teapots and mugs as well. Imported from England, these teacups feature diverse designs, textures and materials. Well, it always goes with some cake.
Yeah.
So here you go, that's my velvet to you. The enjoyment process also intricately follows British style. Right, so as you could have seen in this edition of Time Out, we've had some great time shopping, relaxing with some great tea and some great atmosphere here. And I really don't want you yourself to miss out on that. So why don't you come over here and enjoy it all for yourself if you have the time in Ho Chi Minh City. And that's it for this edition of Time Out. Goodbye for now and until next time.
And that is the end of this episode of Expat Living. I hope you have enjoyed our journey exploring Ho Chi Minh City, that full of lesser known facts with historian Tim Doling. And of course, chilling time in our Time Out. If you would like to provide feedback or comment on anything you see in our program, feel free to email to us at expatliving@vtv.vn. You can also log on to vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go. Thank you so much for being with us. This is Expat Living and goodbye for now.